Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of the Middle Georgia Spotlight. I'm your host, Jack Ellis. We're glad to have you with us today. We have as our guest today in the spotlight Dr. Chester Fontenot, who is a professor of African Studies and Religious Studies. Was it Religious Studies? At Mercer University. He has a long time, but he's working hard on various projects, and we're glad to have him with us. Glad to have you with us. And let us thank our sponsors, Caduceus Medicine, and J. Franklin Automotives, and of course WMUB here at Mercer University, Channel 38, getting ready to be Channel 31. But you can watch us, of course, you're watching us here on Mercer, on Cox Cable, Channel 112. Welcome back to the program, Doc.
Well, thank you very much. Glad to be back.
Yeah, when I had you here when you were here the last time, we only had 15 minutes, and we just ran out of time. There's so much to talk to you about.
Right.
And this new project that you're working on, digitization of slave records for the Middle Georgia area here in Macon, in cooperation with the clerk of the court, Erica Woodford. What brought this about? Why is this?
Well, Erica and I are very good friends, and we were out to lunch about 6 years ago, a little over 6 years ago. And during lunch, we sat there talking about all kinds of things involving Macon's history, that are. And then she mentioned that she had found these records in the archives in her office, the Bibb County Superior Court, where she is clerk, and she's custodian of these records. So
and they've been there all the time?
Yes. So I didn't think I'd heard her, correctly when she said that. I said, "You found what?" And she told me. We couldn't finish our lunch fast enough to get back to her office. And then she took me up to the archives and pulled out one of the books, and there they were, these records. And man, I can't tell you the feeling that came over me, feeling of both excitement, but also intense sadness and pain, that black people, our people, were not only redefined as property, but so much so that records of transactions of purchasing and selling black people were entered as official documents in the Superior Court.
Property.
In Property Deeds Division of the Superior Court. And so, we know this happened.
Yeah.
We know that black people were defined as property.
Yeah.
But to actually sit there and look at the actual records, is a whole nother thing, you say.
I think a lot of people don't realize the role that Macon played in the slave trade, because even though Macon didn't have a lot of plantations here, but it supplied the plantations. So they sold the slaves here who went south, Albany and different places.
Exactly. Macon was very active in the slave trading process, both maintaining slaves and also trading slaves. Very, very active. In fact, there were two auction sites downtown, right here in Macon, one in front of the courthouse. And so Macon was very central to it. And Georgia, in fact, was one of the state that was known as the worst state for anybody black, slave or free, to be in, but especially if one was a slave.
And I read that. In reading Frederick Douglass's autobiography in Maryland, he was saying that if a slave was being sold, he wanted to go anywhere but Georgia.
That's right.
He said, "Don't sell me to Georgia." The slaves, the word had gotten back that Georgia was the worst place.
That's right. We have slave narratives, right? That of slaves that in fact lived in Georgia. Black people who were slaves who lived in Georgia. And almost all of them say, "Oh my God, being sold and being sent to Georgia, or being enslaved in Georgia," they refer to it as being sent to hell.
My.
And I did a project trying to discover any Underground Railroad connections, in Georgia. You can't find them.
How voluminous the documents that you're looking at? If you had to give an estimate, how many people we're talking?
There are, right now we are about halfway through the property deeds records, right? The archive. There are 17 volumes that we pulled, right, that are germane to what we're doing. Bibb County was incorporated in 1823.
Yeah.
And slavery ends in 1865. So those are the parameters of our
Right.
project, right? Okay, so there are 17 volumes of these records, right, that are there. We're now close to being through the 8th volume, and we already have uncovered about 650 slave transaction records.
Well, you know, that's very important to me and should be important to everyone with the connection to the ancestors. What I discovered through our own research, my family's research, and I shared briefly with you, is that my paternal grandmother, my grandfather's mother, was sold to Georgia from Virginia as a 13-year-old girl. She arrived here in 1850, born in 1837 in Virginia, sold to a guy by the name of John Ellis, came to Macon in 1850 as a 13-year-old and started having babies about 15 or 16.
Right.
And then my grandfather. So I have a very personal interest in this and connected to it in a whole lot of ways. But now so as you said, slavery ended in 1865 in Macon.
Right.
It ended, Lincoln signed the proclamation, Emancipation Proclamation
In
in
1863, right.
But it was 2 years later before Macon finally.
Before the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is ratified January 31st, 1865, but then it is not fully ratified until December of 1865, because it had been ratified by all the states, right? But it went into effect in January 31st of 1865, right? So slaves are now being told we are truly free, okay? Because the Emancipation Proclamation was a great document, but it only freed slaves in those territories and those states that were in open rebellion to the Union, okay? Meaning they were fighting, et cetera, right? So there are a number of states that weren't included, like Kentucky, for example, Maryland, you know, et cetera. Those states on the outlying areas, right, of the Confederacy.
Border states.
The border states, right, that were not included, right? And so a state like Texas, for example, that was a slaveholding state, but they weren't in open, I mean, they really weren't a lot of fighting and stuff going on in Texas, okay? So Texas was kind of an outlier during the conflict, you see, that kind of thing. There was some tension there and conflict, but not a whole lot, right? So in 1863, with the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, slaves in Texas never even knew about it, because the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect because it had to be read in public, right, before in front of the slaves and the slave owners, right, and then the Union soldiers would say, okay, you're free now. They don't own you anymore, right, that kind of stuff, and then it went into effect. If you had not heard about the Emancipation Proclamation, then you could pretend like, you know, I don't know about it. I didn't know that. These are still my slaves, you see? So the Emancipation Proclamation was an important document, right, et cetera. But for example, Georgia, the state of Georgia, did not even recognize the Emancipation Proclamation until 1864. Because
the war was still going on in Georgia.
The war was still going on in Georgia. In 1864, when Sherman comes through, you know, Georgia, is the first time that freedom for people of African descent actually becomes a reality. Right, but until then, so you have January 1863 until Sherman comes in 1864, black people are still living the same lives that they were living before the Emancipation Proclamation here in Georgia.
You mentioned Texas, and of course we know of the celebration Juneteenth.
Right.
I guess the slaves couldn't say June 19th, which was the day.
Contraction.
So there's Juneteenth.
Right.
Now that was 1865. But here in Macon, they surrendered at Tatler Square Park, 1865. We have a Juneteenth festival that will take place from the 7th to the 15th in Tatler Square Park on the 15th, because that's where Macon surrendered to the Union Army. And I understand there were even colored troops here. The occupying troops in Macon were colored troops.
Exactly.
So I can imagine that didn't go over too well.
Not at all. Not at, yeah, now you know the white supremacists really didn't take to that very well at
I
all.
think there were two colored regiments here
Yes.
from my
Yeah,
reading.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that. So, in your research, though, this is so fascinating to me. In your research, what do you once you get all of these records digitized? How will you inform the public, if you will? How will the public benefit from this, other than doing our personal research for our own families?
Genealogical
But how will it?
purposes, yeah. So the research project has a number of facets, right? First, of course, the genealogical research. So many people, like yourself, looking for Judy, right? Your ancestor,
Yeah.
right there. And there are a number of black people in this area know of the project and calling me up, emailing me, stuff like that, and seeing me somewhere and saying, find my grandmother, find my great grandmother, that kind of stuff. And so it's tremendous, value right there. Okay, but then. So we're making it. It's going to be publicly accessible, so that people can in fact go on the website that we're going to have, and the documents are going to be there along with a index, right? And such that somebody could enter in.
Okay.
I'd like to know how many kids under the age of 13 were bought and sold between the years 1823 and 1845. Right here in Bibb County, they could enter those search criteria there, and it would pull up those documents, send them straight to them. They would have access to primary source materials, in that way. Okay, yeah. So that purpose. The second is for educational purposes.
The school system, hopefully.
Yeah, the school system. Right. Right now, there's a dearth of materials for anyone who would like to teach teacher in the public or private schools, who would like to teach, say, a module during a semester on what happened to people of African descent, here in Middle Georgia, right, between this period, 1823 to 1865. Right now, the textbooks, we just don't have that kind of materials, right? So teachers will be able then to access the documents. So they will have primary source materials right there, right? The third application of the project is, once we get funded, we're going to bring in some folks from curriculum and instruction to write course planning materials, right? Such that there'll be course packets available on the website, such that a teacher who wants to teach about this and have a module in their curriculum, right, for the semester, their syllabus, could then download a course packet, right? And be able to take that course packet right into the classroom if they want to, and teach from it or modify it to their own specifications and needs. So can you imagine, say, an 8th grade teacher saying, I want to teach in a class on, we have a section now on American history and et cetera, the history of the South or in Georgia, whatever. I want to do a week or 2-week session. I want to do 3 or 4 classes on what happened to black people, here in Georgia. They could then access those documents and also the course planning materials, the whole course packet, right? Take it into class. You have 8th grade students sitting there looking at primary source materials. Yeah.
Well, this is it's so fitted and an opportune time to do this. We're approaching our bicentennial, as you said,
Right.
1822, 1823, county
Right.
and city was formed. So we're going to give these people who was nameless and faceless,
Right. Life.
owned as property,
That's right.
that we're going to respect their humanity. We're
That's
going
right.
to say this was a person.
Exactly.
Not to embarrass anyone, but just to inform people.
Right.
Because if you look at, one thing I did when I was mayor, I don't like to talk about revisionist history, but one thing I did when I was mayor, I signed an executive order to apologize for slavery.
I remember.
And at the time, at the 1830 census, a document that I used, I looked at the 1830 census. Do you know the population of Macon at that time was 50-50 white and black, although the 5th percent of the
Right.
black people were slaves for the
Right.
most part. There were a few
Exactly.
free. But that shows you how instrumental black people have been
Right.
in the development of this region from when. So hopefully this project, will it be finished by 2022,
We're looking,
2023?
hopefully. Well, I projected, Eric and I projected a 3-year project, right, to be able to get all this done, right, because it's painstaking work, You know, it really is. You know, sitting there turning pages and
Yeah.
you know, of these old books, right?
How is it preserved? Is it pretty well?
They're pretty well preserved. Yeah, very well preserved. Right. Now, we're lucky, you know, because a lot of courthouses were either burned
Yeah.
or had significant water damage.
Yeah.
Some clerks, you know, didn't know what they had, and so they never kept up with stuff and all that kind of thing. We've been very fortunate here that the documents are in very good shape for the most part, you know.
Yeah.
The only thing is, I mean, it's kind of hard to read because you have 19th century cursive writing that's very fancy, looping
Sure.
letters and,
Yeah.
you know, and all that kind of
Yes,
stuff,
yes,
you know.
I've seen
And so my students who are working with us on the project, many of whom have not been trained in cursive writing at all, you know, because they took that out of the curriculum at school. So the first thing that we do with them is to spend a couple of days just getting them used to looking at cursive writing. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, we have to. Yeah, you know, it's a stage. There's some stages that we go through before we even turn them loose and you know, to actually look at the actual documents. Right, we have to go through a process. Okay, here are the letters. Here's how they look. You know, that kind of stuff. We have to basically train them in looking at cursive writing and how to interpret and you know, cursive writing, how to read it. You see.
Now, I'm going to put this back to politics because when you talk of Erica Woodford and talk about you, a person such as yourself, of course, you're here at Mercer, you didn't have to do this, but you're working worldwide on the Africana Encyclopedia. But those records have been there, like you said, all
they've
this
been there,
time.
certainly.
But she's the first African-American to hold that position.
Exactly.
And she said, we have something here.
Exactly. It took
Even
her-
though it was there before all this time,
Right.
but other people didn't think it was worth
It took
anything.
Erica's agency to do it, you know.
And
she
it took a person like you at a university
Right.
with students to implement it.
Right. So, you know, it's a true partnership
Yeah.
between her office, Erica, and the clerk's office of the Superior Court, right? Erica and then Stephanie Miller, who is the chief deputy,
Yeah, I know
right,
Stephanie.
clerk. With the three of us are partners, right, on this research project, full partners, right? And so as we go forward, right, and apply for grants and, you know, et cetera, and determine how the project is going and structuring, what we're hoping to do is get through these projects. We have four collections to look at. First are the property deeds that we're about halfway through. Then there are the chattel mortgages where folks took property and mortgaged it to buy the stuff, right? And so we know we're going to find in the chattel mortgages some of the information that duplicates in the property deeds archives because they're going to be slaves who are going to be mortgaged, right? So they could buy a plow or something, or another piece of land, or horses, or, you know, plows, or whatever, you know, that they want to plow. That's part of their estate, okay? So there's a chattel mortgages also that we're going to be digitizing and pulling that information out of, right, for the index, right, that we're going to have. And then plantation maps. We have a whole room in the clerk's office of maps of plantations in the Bibb County area, right? And so we'll be digitizing those as well. Hopefully we'll do it in 3D, right? So that you can actually see, you know, the scale, you know, in 3D of the plantation maps. And then the fourth collection that we'll do a bit later are the chain gang records. So all those chain gang records are there in that in the archives, you know, as well. And the majority of people sent us to chain gangs were black people. You know, after slavery ended, that was the other way.
Free labor.
Free labor and re-enslave black people. You know, so we're going to do that, and then once we do that, then we're going to be looking at the probate court documents, because this then gives flesh and blood to the people, because there you have marriage, birth records, death records, you know, et cetera, right, and all that. So then see if we can somehow trace some of the people, as many as we can, you know, that we have found in the property deeds archives, and see what happened to them. You know, do they have families? Did they, you know, get married? You know, whatever, you know, and kind of flesh out those stories. Now, in the while we've been going along with this project, and we've gotten a lot of publicity from it, you know, WMAZ and, you know, the Macon Telegraph and, you know, other folks, people know about the project, right? I've gotten calls from other counties stating that, look, we have some of that stuff too. You know, we don't want to be left out, you know. So I've gotten calls from Houston County, and got calls from Monroe County. In fact, we went over to Monroe County and met with the president of the Monroe Historical Association, who in fact was the one that contacted me about their documents, and said, look, we got a lot of that stuff over here too. So this is a project that, let's say, Middle Georgia stretches all the way from Savannah to Columbus, right? And so it's a project that will outlive me, which is how I want it to be.
Yes.
It's not. This is not a Fontenot's project.
Right.
This is a project for the community. This is a project for our people. And so as we continue to work, in this area and in this project, we're hoping to develop the kind of structure and paradigm so that when we go to other counties, that we can kind of plug and play,
Well, one thing that we have going for us here, and you're very much involved with the Tubman Museum, the Pan-African Festival, is that we have this organization, this building, which is to preserve and promote African American culture, history, and so forth. What role will the Tubman play? Will there be any linkage between the Tubman, or will this strictly be the library, at the genealogy department, the courthouse, and Mercer University? Will organization like the Tubman Museum be involved in this?
Well, at some point, we hope to involve the Tubman. Tubman knows about this project, as well as the Washington Library. They have Muriel, there, who's the genealogist, fantastic.
She is.
Want to know anything about making beer? Muriel, Muriel is the person, and so they're aware of what we're doing, in this project. And at some point, when we are able to get it intelligible to people who aren't working in it, stuff like that, and be able to present it as such, then we hope to involve as many people as possible and make it much more of a kind of community effort.
I know you believe in more is better. That we can't talk. There can't be enough history. We need to share. Now we're celebrating the Juneteenth Festival here. We just had the Pan-African Festival.
Right.
What's significant? Why is it significant to? We know the Pan-African Festival. That's for all throughout the diaspora. We're talking about the entire diaspora. This project, the Juneteenth Festival, primarily, is started in Texas, Galveston, Texas. Now it's here. We're celebrated all over the world now, at least all over this country, for the most part.
Right.
So what's the significance of it? Just to say that black people didn't read and didn't know how to read, but Juneteenth, what's the significance of that celebration?
Well, the Juneteenth celebration, I mean, every other ethnic group in this country has, and most throughout the world, have their own celebrations that lets them know who they are, from which they construct identity, okay? Except for black people. We don't have, these kind of ceremonies and rituals, et cetera, that are deeply rooted in our history, our culture, our language, and, et cetera, and all of that. So a festival such as the Juneteenth, celebration is one of the events that can help serve that kind of purpose, that kind of function. It can serve it not only as a time of a call to gather, right? Like in Africa and Ghana, the village, there that both of us have experienced numerous times, right? That kind of thing. The call comes out. All right, you come. People get dressed up. Food is being cooked. People dancing. The music.
The elders are respected.
The elders are respected, and all that kind of stuff, right? All right. Well, Juneteenth was that kind of event after slavery ended. In Black America, just about every community, especially in the South, celebrated Juneteenth.
More so than the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st. We don't see too many celebrations around that.
But Juneteenth was the time. It's the oldest African American celebration in the country. Juneteenth is.
I didn't know that.
Yes, it is. Right.
Okay.
Now Emancipation Day. Right.
But we don't celebrate it.
We don't celebrate it anymore. There used to be celebrations of Emancipation Day.
Here in Macon, I can't ever remember celebrating growing up as a child.
When I was
Juneteenth was only been around about 20 years.
Right, only been around 20 years, but Emancipation Day they would have big celebration in the major cities of Emancipation Day. I know because, I mean, even in Los Angeles, where I grew up, you know, Emancipation Day, they have big Emancipation Day parades and all that kind of stuff. In Chicago, they had it. When I was in New York, they had it, et cetera. When I was in Indianapolis, when I was pastoring right outside of Indianapolis, Emancipation Day, they have big celebration picnics and all that kind of stuff. Folks and the Masons and the various secret societies would have their place in the parade, all dressed up, you know, that kind of stuff. And yes.
Yeah, so Doc, the question begs to be answered here. I ask as well, and I hope I can get an answer.
What happened?
What is the Tubman doing to promote this? It is our museum for African American culture, history, and so forth. But on Emancipation Day, it's locked. It's closed.
Yeah. Well, I just
because
don't know.
it's on the 1st of January.
Yeah, I don't know.
What can we do? Should we be doing more? I know you don't run the organization. You're a professor. You volunteer.
Yeah, I don't run
Tubman,
so I just don't know. All right. I know the Tubman.
Would it be worth something worth?
It would be worth. I know one thing, that the reason that the Tubman is so involved in the Pan-African Festival is because it actually is a sponsor of the Pan-African Festival.
I know.
Right. And in fact, the Pan-African Festival, without the Tubman, you know, initially starting up, right, when Chia Zakwechi, you know, initially, you know, posed the idea, you know, for it.
And you've been there for early on.
Yeah, I was there the year after it started.
To lend your expertise, your advice, and so forth.
She pulled me in, et cetera. And the first Pan-African Festival was held in Central City Park. Yeah. And you remember that? I remember. And the whole venue was a trailer.
A flatbed truck. I remember it.
That's right. You know, so
this past year, so many people from everywhere.
So it's grown, you know, because of the devotion. But it's not just the Tubman that has caused that festival to grow. Right? The Tubman has performed an important function with the festival in that it's kind of a locus for the meetings and, you know, trying to get money and various things like that. But the Tubman itself suffers from lack of funding, so the Tubman didn't have funding for the festival, right? But they're volunteers. The festival literally runs with volunteers. Now, the Juneteenth celebration, I just don't know. I can't answer that because I just don't know how much the folks who are the managers of the Juneteenth Festival have approached the Tubman and said, "Hey,
create a linkage. Create some synergy.
Can we join in this
because
thing?
We're all in this thing together.
Right. Yeah. So
Emancipation Day, Pan-African Festival, and the Juneteenth. What a great triangle.
Right.
Let me ask you one question. We have a minute left. He gave me a sign here. Now, how can the public, the general public who's watching on channel 112 here and say, well, I have some documents, they're fragmented, how can they get them to you to have them authenticated or what have you? Are you authenticating documents, or are you just getting the ones you have there? Is there any role for the public? I know you have the students you have. Right. What role can the public play?
Well, if people have documents that they would like to see as part of this project, digitized, et cetera, we welcome that, certainly. And what they can do is contact me. You know, my phone number is 478-301-2345.
Professor at Mercer University.
Right. 301-2345.
I interrupt you. Go ahead.
478-301-2345. If they forget the number, all they have to do is go on the Mercer website, do the search, enter my name, it'll pull me up.
Dr. Chester
Fontenot. And they can either call me. If I'm not there, leave a message. I'll call them back, or send me an email.
Well, Doc, you're not from Macon, but we have claimed you for so many years now. Right. We're glad you're here because you bring a wealth of knowledge, and this type of work you're doing is just so exciting to me. And like I said, diversity matters.
Certainly.
Because there were other professors of history at Mercer. There were other clerks down there over the years, and no one saw the importance of doing what you are doing. So congratulations. Thank you so much for what you're doing for our community.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right.
We've been talking with Dr. Chester Fontenot, who is a professor at Mercer University, and he's working on a project digitizing slave records at the Bibb County Courthouse and working with other organizations, other entities and throughout the Middle Georgia area. So if you have some information or if you want to share information, want to know more about it, he told you how to get in contact with him. And we thank you all so much for joining us. Go to YouTube, like us on YouTube, subscribe to us on YouTube, the Middle Georgia Spotlight. Until next week, for Dr. Fontenot, I'm your host, Jack Ellis. Goodbye.